Hi everyone, my name is Carame Elizondo, and this is my wrap-up video on Guantanamo Bay and the Venezuelan migrant crisis. Before we begin, I want to give you an overview of what I will discuss today. First, I will update you on the recent developments. Then I will answer some of your questions, and I'll end with a discussion on the course themes. So, at the base itself, BBC News reported that large sections of the migrant detention camp that had been dismantled. This was revealed through satellite images that show that as of April 16, about two-thirds of the 260 tents that had been set up to house migrants were removed. That means that about 175 tents had been taken down. And at this point, it is unclear as to how many migrants still remain at the facility. Now, despite this reduction, Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, claimed in a recent interview that the base is still operating and that a large number of foreign terrorist immigrants are still being held there. Now, some of the other developments concern the Alien Enemies Act. Recall that this act was invoked on March 15, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Trump administration to use this act to detain and deport Venezuelan migrants. Well, on April 19, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked the Trump administration from deporting another group of Venezuelan migrants accused of being gang members of Tren de Aragua. This ruling was issued after lawyers for the ACLU asked it to intervene on an emergency basis, stating that dozens of Venezuelan migrants faced imminent deportation without the judicial review the justices previously ordered. That same day, the Trump administration filed a response urging the justices to reject the ACLU's request on the migrants' behalf. There have also been new developments in the case of Gilmar Abrego Garcia. This is the man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador's prison known as CCOT. The Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to return Garcia back to the United States, but the administration has yet to bring him back. On April 17, the Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen met with Mr. Garcia, which came after some resistance from the Bukele government. Since then, four House Democrats have traveled to El Salvador to meet with Mr. Garcia in hopes of advancing his return to the U.S. Unfortunately, they have reported that they were not permitted by Salvadorian officials to meet with Mr. Garcia, nor were they able to ascertain a status on his health or confirm that he is actually being held where officials said he is. The case of Gilmar Garcia is going to lead us into one of the questions that I want to address today. The question is, how is the situation in El Salvador related to the situation in Guantanamo Bay? These situations are connected through the government's use of the Alien Enemies Act to detain and deport Venezuelan migrants suspected of gang affiliation with Tren de Aragua. In both cases, the government is justifying these actions under the belief that the United States is under the threat from a foreign enemy, and they are treating these migrants as national security threats. Now, the next question that I want to address is, how has the US gotten away with bypassing constitutional rights for people held at Guantanamo Bay? To this, I will say that they have gotten away with bypassing constitutional rights because Guantanamo exists as a legal gray area. Even though it is controlled by the United States, it is technically not US soil. And this is what creates the arguments that the courts have often stated that Constitution protections don't fully apply at Guantanamo, especially when non citizens have never physically entered the United States. In past court cases like Boumediene v. Bush, there were rulings that some constitutional protections do apply at Guantanamo, but these were mostly about terrorism suspects or migrants intercepted at sea who had never been on U.S. soil. Because of that, courts have often accepted the government's argument that full constitutional rights don't extend to those people. Now, what's happening with Venezuelan migrants is different. Many of them have been on US soil, and legally, anyone on US soil, regardless of immigration status, has constitutional protections like due process and access to legal counsel. The way the US is bypassing these protections now is by claiming that they can speak to a lawyer, but in reality, they are being held without any real way of communicating or meeting with their legal counsel at Guantanamo. Now, for the last question that I will be addressing is how should we feel about checks and balances moving forward? That is a really important question to consider, and it is something that we should all be paying attention to in the news. So I will go over the how the judicial branch has attempted to keep checks and balances on the president. Right now, US District Judge James Boasberg is considering a criminal contempt investigation against the Trump administration because they violated a court order related to the deportation flights. He had ordered a 14-day pause on deporting a group that included alleged Venezuelan and MS-13 gang members. When he learned that the planes had already taken off, he gave a verbal order for them to turn back immediately, but the administration did not comply and instead argued that the order wasn't written down and the planes had already left the US. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that the administration has to return Garcia to the United States. And one of the judges that is currently on this case is also considering contempt charges, pointing out that officials, quote, appear to have done nothing to aid in Abrego Garcia's release from custody and return to the United States. Now, onto the course themes. The first one I'll talk about is power struggles. Right now, the United States and Venezuela are basically in a political standoff. One leader is trying to hold on to power in Venezuela, and another is pushing to carry out deportations as part of his immigration policy. It's turned into sort of a tug of war where the United States uses sanctions and even Venezuelan migrants as leverage to pressure Maduro into giving into the United States' demands. We saw similar dynamics in Trace's presentation, where power struggles played out both domestically between political parties and internationally between global powers like Russia and the United States. Now, another major theme is humanitarian concerns. In my presentation, I discussed how Venezuelan migrants are being denied basic constitutional protections. They're being mistreated by guards at Guantanamo Bay, and they have become a target of the Trump administration as part of a broader agenda against immigration. And we see these kinds of humanitarian crises happening globally. For instance, in Nazareth's presentation, she discussed the ethnic cleansing and genocide that is occurring in Ethiopia. And this shows how humanitarian concerns, whether they occur through state violence or denial of rights, they are affecting vulnerable populations worldwide. And the final theme that I'll discuss is advocacy. In some form, the presentations we've shared in class are all contributing to raising awareness about geopolitical conflicts, and that in itself is a form of advocacy. But advocacy extends beyond the individual, and we see this in the Venezuelan migrant crisis, where human rights organizations and legal aid groups are actively challenging the Trump administration's actions. Members of Congress are also stepping in and advocating for the return of the Venezuelan people who have been sent to Sica or to Guantanamo Bay. At the same time, we've seen how the lack of advocacy can allow certain conflicts to persist, most notably in Ethiopia, where the lack of international response, including from the United States, has contributed to ongoing humanitarian crisis. That concludes my wrap-up video. Thank you all for your time and attention.